Have you ever felt invisible? Like the world was against you and no one even noticed? Today, we're going to tell you the story of Chris Sullivan, a man who was humiliated in front of everyone at work. But this isn't just a story of betrayal. It's a story of overcoming, of faith, and of a new beginning that changed everything. If you've ever experienced something like this, or want to learn how to turn pain into strength, this video is for you. Subscribe to the channel and let your heart connect with this journey. The company's boardroom was a temple of pressure, where talk was louder than air. Chris Sullivan, a 42-year-old employee, had retreated to the sidelines, trying to stay invisible. He had worked there for 10 years, building relationships, taking on difficult projects, but never getting the recognition he deserved. That morning, Brian Mitchell, his office mate and desk neighbor, decided he would be the protagonist. With a crooked smile, Brian presented a report with glaring errors, pointing the finger at Chris as the one responsible. "You're disappearing. Chris, I don't think there's any more room for you here." The room laughed. Some even stood up to applaud. Chris felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. His voice, which used to be firm, became shaky. "It's not true," he whispered, but no one heard. At that moment, something inside him snapped. The humiliation wasn't just public, it was personal. Brian wasn't just a rival, he was a friend. They had shared coffees, late-night conversations until envy began to run like poison. Chris remembered the last time he had felt like this, when his father died, and he couldn't say goodbye without crying. Now, the pain was different, but just as vivid. That night he sat on the couch, staring at the ceiling, wondering if his entire life had been a mistake. The light from the lamp flickered as if he were crying too. He knew he had to get out of this situation, but he was afraid to start over or stop. The next day was a roller coaster of emotions. Chris arrived at work with his head down, avoiding eyes. Brian, on the other hand, looked like a general in victory. "Are you on leave?" he asked, his tone contemptuous. Chris didn't answer. At lunch, he stared at his empty plate and thought of the words of his mother, who had died years ago. "Life is not about what you get, but what you endure." The phrase echoed in his mind, like a signal. He didn't know what would come next, but he knew he couldn't go on like this. Night fell, and Chris opened his laptop, looking at his contact list. There was a name he had never considered. A former boss, now at a competing company. The idea of leaving everything seemed absurd, but the idea of staying was worse. He typed an email, his hands shaking. "I need an opportunity. I'm ready to prove that I'm more than you think." The cursor blinked, waiting. He closed the notebook, took a deep breath, and decided, "I'm going to stand up. This time, I'm not going to let anyone tell me what I am." The next day was a storm of silence. Chris avoided Brian, but his colleague seemed to have become a specter, always appearing at unexpected moments. At the department meeting, Brian presented a project that Chris had worked on months earlier without credit. "This is amazing work, Chris. You just might need more time to improve," he said with a smile that was like a knife. Chris felt his blood rise, but he kept his cool. He knew that if he fought back, he would fall for Brian's game. That night, Chris lay on the couch, his brain racing. He wondered if his whole life had been a cycle of striving for recognition. He remembered the day his younger brother James died of cancer. He had withdrawn from his family at the time, believing that his career was more important. Now he saw how wrong he had been. The humiliation wasn't just about the work, it was about the lack of value he placed on himself. The next day, Chris went to the office of his boss, Marcus, who had retired 2 years ago. The man, now with white hair and a deep gaze, greeted him with a smile. "You're here for a reason, aren't you?" he asked, as if he had already said it. Chris hesitated, but finally said, "I need a chance. I don't want to be invisible anymore." Marcus nodded, as if he had expected it. "There's an opening at the company where I work, but it's tough. You need to prove that you can handle it." Chris felt butterflies in his stomach, but also a fire. It was time to choose: continue in hell or face the unknown. That night, Chris wrote a letter to Brian. It wasn't an angry letter, but a farewell letter. "You made me see what I didn't want to see. I appreciate that." He didn't envy it, but he kept it to himself. The next morning, he took the bus to the new company, his heart racing. The city seemed different, as if the world had reinvented itself. He didn't know what was coming, but he felt that, for the first time, he wasn't in control. The new company was a completely different reality. Chris was greeted with a mixture of curiosity and distrust. His previous reception had given him precedent, and he knew he would have to prove himself to be more than just a broken man. On his first day, he was assigned an ambitious project: developing software for one of the largest corporations in the industry. His boss, a 50-year-old woman named Clara, inspired him with a calculating look. "You have to prove that you deserve to be here," she said bluntly. Chris agreed, but his stomach tightened. For the first few days, he felt like an outsider in a world that was not his own. His colleagues were young, ambitious, and he wondered if he would measure up. But then, in a meeting, he had an idea. A simple but effective solution that no one had considered. Clara looked at him in surprise and said, "That's good. Let's try it." Chris felt a rupture that almost brought him to tears. For years he had felt invisible, but here, in a moment of crisis, his voice was heard. But the pressure was mounting. The company delivered results, and Chris began to feel the weight of new expectations. He wondered if he was partnering in a fight he couldn't win. That night he called his sister, who lived in another state. "Are you okay?" she asked. Chris hesitated, then said, "I am. But I need some strength." She laughed, as if telling him something he couldn't see. "You already have it. You just have to believe." The words echoed in his mind like a signal. He began to seek support, both at work and outside. An older colleague, Marcus, who had been through similar situations, became a mentor. "You don't have to be perfect. You have to be real," he said. Chris began to understand that strength came not from being the best, but from being authentic. He entered his job with more confidence, but also with humility. Life wasn't about defeats, but about how you rose from them. The first quarter at his new company was a roller coaster. Chris faced constant challenges, but he also discovered a new sense of purpose. He felt lighter, as if he had left behind the weight of humiliation. Little by little, he began to build real relationships, not just professional ones. A colleague, Anna, who was an expert in artificial intelligence, became a friend. "You're stronger than you think," she once said as they discussed a project. Chris resonated, feeling a connection he hadn't expected. Yet Brian's memory still haunted him. Sometimes he imagined his colleague laughing, telling him to fight. But then he remembered what his mother used to say. "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger." He decided not to let the envy of the past get the better of him. Instead, he focused on what he could control: his work, his attitude, his life. One night, he sat on the couch and looked at his phone. There was a message from Brian. "How are you? I hope you found something better." Chris didn't respond. Instead, he wrote a letter, but he wasn't envious. "You made me see what I didn't want to see," he wrote. "I appreciate that." He put the letter away and decided to move on. Life at the new company began to flow. Chris felt like he was part of something bigger, and that was a sense of hope. He didn't know what the future held, but he felt that for the first time, he was on the right track. The pain of the past was still there, but now he was using it as fuel, not as a prison. The new company was no paradise. Expectations were high, and Chris quickly realized that the pressure was greater than he had anticipated. "The project I was working on was complex, and time was short." He felt like a boat in a storm, trying to navigate without a map. Once, during a planning meeting, he suggested a different approach, but the project leader, an older man named Daniel, ignored him. "You don't understand the context," he said with a hint of disdain. Chris felt his blood rising, but he kept his cool. However, the challenge was not just professional. His family was also in shambles. His father, who had retired, began to withdraw, saying that he didn't understand what he was doing anymore. Chris felt uncomfortable, but also frustrated. He tried to explain, but words wouldn't let him through. The distance between them grew, and he wondered if he was losing what was most important. That night, he sat on the couch, staring at the ceiling. Life seemed like a dangerous balance, and he feared it would break. But then he remembered his mother's saying, "Life is not about what you get, but about what you endure." He decided that he would not give up. Even though the pressure was great, he would keep going. The next challenge came in an unexpected way. A colleague whom he considered a friend began to criticize him publicly at meetings. Chris felt his heart sink, but also a determination. He knew that he could not let himself be carried away by the envy of others. He focused mainly on what mattered: his work, his family, and the pressure at work was mounting, and Chris began to feel the weight of all the expectations. But then came the surprising news. Brian, his former colleague, had been fired for dishonesty. Chris felt a mix of depression and sadness. He didn't want revenge, but justice. Yet he wondered if that was enough. That night he sat on the couch and looked at his phone. There was a message from Brian. "You won, Chris, but don't forget, the world isn't fair." Chris felt a lump in his throat. He didn't want to be the villain, but he also didn't want to forget what had happened. He wondered if revenge was really the right path. As he pondered this, a call came in. It was Clara, his boss. "You need help," she said. Chris hesitated, but then said, "I'm not sure I want help. I think I need to figure this out on my own." Clara laughed as if informing him of something he couldn't see. "You don't have to figure it out on your own. Life is about connection, not isolation." The words echoed in his mind like a signal. He decided not to let his anger get the better of him. Instead, he focused on his work, his family, and his own healing. Revenge was not the way to go. Oh, forgiveness, yes. But how could he forgive someone who had destroyed him? That night, Chris sat on the couch, staring at the ceiling. His mind was racing, but he felt a strange pull, as if something inside him was trying to speak. He opened his prayer notebook, a habit he had abandoned years ago. "Lord, help me find peace," he wrote. The words were heavy, but also soothing. He remembered when his mother was still alive, and how she used to say, "Faith is what keeps us standing when everything else falls." He didn't know if he believed that, but he had to try. He began to pray, not for revenge, but for strength. "Give me the courage to forgive," he prayed. The next day, he went to the office with a new determination. He didn't have to beat Brian. He had to beat his own pain. He sat at his desk, staring at his computer, and decided that he would not let the past define his future. He focused on his work, his family, and the life he wanted to build. But peace did not come suddenly. It came slowly, like a flowing river. He began to see Brian not as an enemy, but as a man who had made bad choices. And he, in turn, decided to make the right choices. Revenge was not the way to go. Oh, forgiveness, yes. Over the past few months, Chris has seen his work transform. He's no longer the invisible employee he once was. He's part of a team that's building something meaningful. The project that started out with so much difficulty has become a success, and he's been praised for his work. But what's most impressive to him is what he's learned. He's become a mentor to new employees, sharing his experiences. "You don't have to be perfect," he'd say. "You have to be real." He felt like, for the first time, he was using his pain to help others. Life isn't about what you get, it's about what you leave behind. His relationship with his family has improved too. He's apologized for what he's done, and his father, though still distant, has begun to understand. "You're on the right track," he'd said one day. Chris stepped forward, feeling a break he didn't know he needed. And then, one day, he got a letter. It was from Brian, who had retired and was working at a nonprofit. "You made me see what I didn't want to see," he wrote. "I appreciate that." Chris kept the letter and decided that while he couldn't go back, he could move forward. Life wasn't about what you lose, but what you gain. And he had gained a lot. Chris Sullivan didn't become a hero by accident. He became an example of resilience, of how pain can change us. Life isn't about what you lose, but about what you choose to do with what's left. What would you do in his place? Do you believe that faith can guide us through moments of darkness? Share this story with someone who needs to hear this message. And don't forget, subscribe to the channel and keep connecting with stories that really matter.